In the last section of this module, we are going to look at the neural adaptations to exercise. To be honest, the book does an absolutely fantastic job in this area. For most textbooks that I've read and kind of been a part of in writing, usually this part really gets skimmed over and they don't talk about a lot of the real specifics. This book spends a ton of time kind of explaining some really cool ideas behind how this may be happening. A lot of this is kind of theory-based because it's really hard to test kind of these individual motor units and the thought process behind it, the drive to perform, et cetera, et cetera. But they really offer a lot of great insight. So I highly recommend going in and if you haven't already been reading, you should be anyways, but really paying attention about page 135 and on. But we'll walk through the objectives here is to explain how neural patterns can help performance, get an idea of if you change some way, if that would be good or bad for performance, and distinguish, last we'll distinguish between hypertrophy and the neural components of strength. Okay, so some of the neural adaptations that are introduced in this book I'm going to highlight here. Again, this is great to just kind of start to wrap your head around how altering some of these neural recruitment patterns are really going to kind of pay off. So one of the topics that they bring up, which I think is a pretty good one, so the idea of an improved neuron excitability. This is kind of brought up with sprinters, but the way that this works, and an example is the idea of working through the size principle, right? So in the size principle, you have the slow motor units are recruited fast, then the type 2As, then the type 2B or X fibers. And the reason that they're excited in that pattern is because the slow motor units are smaller, they're more easily excitable, therefore they fire first. In this case, it's suggested that exercise training can reduce the amount of excitability it takes before that neuron fires, and so that you can fire all three of the fiber types much faster and generate more force and more power just by altering how quickly those motor units will fire, which I think is pretty cool. There's also improved recruitment patterns and synchronization. Recruitment patterns just mean by selecting which parts of the muscles are kind of contracting. So for most, at least submaximal exercises, like in competitive activity, of course, all of the motor units and all of your muscle fibers are never going to be active at exactly the same time, right? Because if they did, once you fatigued, then literally your muscle would be completely spent. And so what the body does is it will actually kind of alter and cycle which motor units get turned off and on to give these motor units the ability to recruit or to rest and recover. Because even when we're talking about slow twitch muscle fibers and we say that they're fatigue resistant, that doesn't mean that they're not fatigable. So all fibers will eventually fatigue, and fatigue is easily defined as just losing, not being able to maintain the amount of force that you're trying to generate. And so for endurance athletes, it's actually altering in the asynchronous recruitment, right? So they're trying to save these by cycling them in different, more improved patterns, picking up on which fiber types may be starting to fatigue quicker, and then switching to a different fiber type and working through those ideas such that in these long duration events, you prevent really the majority of muscle fibers from becoming fatigued. In resistance or sprint and power type exercises, it's more of a synchronous recruitment. And this is the idea of training for these really short bursts in activity. So like a weightlifter, for example, a power lifter who's trying to do a power clean, they would actually be training into this synchronous recruitment where the body isn't worried about fatiguing and completely, wearing that muscle out and not having the ability to go anymore. So they would actually be trying to improve recruitment by recruiting as many muscle fibers as they can at once and ignoring that cycling idea. Again, pretty cool stuff. Another idea is that you improve the strength performance by decreasing the amount of contraction by antagonist muscle. So as you start to learn how to do lifts more properly, at the beginning, your body just kind of contracts both muscles, and agonist and antagonist, in some ways in order to kind of stabilize you. As you get better and better and more trained in those movements, then the antagonists go away. That means that the same amount of motor units will actually produce more force because they're not having to work against these antagonist muscles. Another cool neural adaptation experiment that I'll bring up is the crossover effect. So this is, I think, just kind of a mind-blowing classic experiment. They actually showed this, that if you essentially do unilateral training, so if you do get on a leg press and only use your right leg to do that leg press, of course, as you would expect, if you train that for 8 to 10 weeks, then you would get stronger in your right leg. But would you get stronger in your left leg? Traditional sense would say no, right? You're not overloading it. You're not producing any type of muscle adaptation. None of that stuff we talked about with fiber types is having any type of effect on the muscle. And so in theory, you wouldn't get stronger in that leg at all. However, because the neural adaptations are actually a pretty strong adaptation to exercise, what this study found was that actually the left leg got stronger. So the right leg got about 35% increase in strength, and there was about an 8 to 10% increase in strength in the left leg, which actually hadn't lifted an entire weight the entire study, which I think is pretty cool, that just doing the motion is able to kind of simulate this pattern. And because we are built the way that we are, that those neurons then work on both sides of the body and develop that movement pattern to improve strength. There's also some pretty good evidence of improved brain function. There is a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor that is actually released from skeletal muscle during exercise, which can help improve lots of things to the brain. It improves brain blood flow. It improves learning through improved synapse formation, and does a lot. So when we talk about exercise as medicine, a lot of the exercise stuff really works through that way, and that's how we're going to close the lecture. Before we get in, I just want to bring this up, as this is kind of a very classic idea of how we demonstrate neural versus strength training gains in skeletal muscle. So this is a really common figure and very commonly spoken about. So in the beginning, taking a novice, so again, this is someone who's never worked out before, and starting them on a resistance exercise training paradigm. So we have 3 curves here, and starting at week 0, the 3 curves are going to be hypertrophy, or the size of the muscle fibers, the neural component, and then the amount of strength that this person is gaining as time goes along. So what we can see here is that early on, we see a really rapid increase in strength, which is great, right? So if anyone works in the personal training field, they get someone can come in, you can start working with them, and you can see huge improvements. The slope of this line is just huge, right? They gain a lot of strength, they get stronger than the bench press a lot faster than one would be expected. And in fact, if you actually were to take a biopsy and went in and looked at the fiber size, most people would argue that they actually haven't grown a bit. There's no hypertrophy going on in the muscle that early. There's some recent evidence that suggests that maybe there's a little, but for the most part, you shouldn't be seeing these huge gains in strength, right? This is based on the idea that the larger the cross-sectional area of the muscle, the more myofibrils you put in there, the stronger you get. If you don't have any of that, how are you getting stronger? Well, that is all because of this neural component, right? So you're improving patterns, you're improving the recruitment of motor units, you're decreasing antagonist movements, you're synchronizing muscle units up, and you were just getting these huge gains in strength. And then after about 8 weeks, so this actually demonstrates we get a little bit of hypertrophy, maybe really hard to tell, even if you have a really fancy MRI machine. Most studies, so I don't love this. I know the author of this textbook, Bill Kramer, and he's got a little bit different. This is one of his beefs that a lot of people do 8-week training studies. In my opinion, most people that I know do 12 to 16 weeks, again, because of this phenomena here. And so, but really at around this 10 to 14 week time, this is when hypertrophy really starts to happen and we start to see increases in strength. So what we can say is before 8 weeks, the increases in strength are really only due to neural components, some type of improvement in the nervous system. After about 8 to 10 weeks, the improvement in strength is due primarily to muscle hypertrophy. Right? Neural component levels out. We kind of get to that new steady state, new homeostasis. It doesn't move. However, we keep getting a little bit stronger because our muscles get bigger. So that'll kind of end up that. I wanted to finish this lesson here talking a little bit again about exercise and medicine. Several of you guys in your intro videos were interested in exercise and medicine. So one of the diseases that I chose to talk about in this class I present to you guys is multiple sclerosis. This fits well into the nervous system because multiple sclerosis is a neurodegenerative disease. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a 2-minute video in this video, and then we'll come back and briefly kind of talk about this.
On multiple sclerosis, or MS, a disease that affects millions of people worldwide. But what exactly is multiple sclerosis? MS primarily affects the central nervous system, which consists of the brain, spinal cord, and optic nerve. Just about everything you do depends on this system functioning properly, from breathing to moving and even watching YouTube videos. And these actions are all facilitated by neurons throughout your body, cells which we've talked about many times in our previous videos. These neurons are able to send signals all throughout the body at incredible speeds, in part because of the fatty coating that surrounds them, something called myelin or the myelin sheath. This myelin insulates the impulses and allows the nerve signals to reach their destination. However, in the case of MS, this is where the issues occur. The immune system is designed to fight off disease from viruses, bacteria, parasites, or other agents, and does so by distinguishing these things from healthy tissue. But in the case of MS, the immune system ends up attacking the myelin in what is classified as an autoimmune disorder. This process of demyelination can lead to a buildup of scar tissue, hence the word sclerosis. The CNS then becomes unable to send and receive signals properly. Messages traveling along the neurons may be slowed down, distorted, or stopped altogether. Because of the varying locations and nature of demyelination, the symptoms of MS are incredibly diverse. They can range from muscle weakness to decreased coordination, fatigue, vision problems, numbness, or even paralysis, though an MRI scan of the brain to look for lesions or scarring is integral to diagnosis. For some, the symptoms come as acute episodes, while others experience more chronic and permanent symptoms which worsen over time. At this point, no true cause or cure is known. While potential links to environmental factors, viral infections, and genetics have been found, studies are ongoing and not yet conclusive. And while there has been a lot of work towards not only alleviating some of the symptoms but slowing their progression, sadly, these treatments do not work for all MS sufferers. Ultimately, bringing light to this issue in an effort to support and fund research is an incredibly important step to erasing MS. And though many of us will never truly understand the challenges of living with MS, we can work together to raise awareness. We would be so grateful if you could take a moment and pass this video on to your family and friends and join in the effort to end MS. This episode of ASAP Science is supported by 23andMe. 23andMe is a DNA analysis service that allows you to explore your own genes. Whether you're interested in discovering your global origins or understanding your health and your risk for disease, be sure to check out 23andme.com/ASAP. With the help of their DNA kits, connect to your past, learn about your present health, and potentially be part of future genetic research, all at 23andme.com/ASAP. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
We'll briefly close out by showing you the types of problems that an MS patient faces compared to healthy controls and what exercise can help do to this. So controls, MS patients versus healthy controls, they lose muscle mass, strength, activation, they get decreases in cardiovascular capacity and VO2 max, they are more at risk for cardiovascular disease, lots of depression and fatigue. Some of this is directly related to this, right? We get decrease in activity level. we get they aren't very functional, and so getting up and doing things is even harder, which they don't want to do. They also have very bad balance. And what that all ultimately relates to is a decrease in QOL, or quality of life. However, if we look at the benefits that exercise training can do, so cardio versus resistance training here. So cardio doesn't do a lot, as we talked about in previous sections, for muscle mass and strength, but we get great cardiovascular benefits, decreases in cardiovascular disease. They get improved functional capacity, balance, and I think important for most of these is they improve quality of life. Resistance training may actually be even better for these patients. We don't quite get the VO2 max gain, but we see gains in almost everything else. And since MS attacks muscles so violently, I think our exercise as medicine is really being geared to using exercise, resistance exercise, to combat this disease. It's still up in the air on whether or not we can actually really heavily slow the progression of this disease, and I think that will be something that will be heavily researched here in the near future. So these are recent studies here just coming out that says, hey, like we can make these patients so much better with exercise training. Now it comes to find out is if we can find and or design protocols that can actually slow the progression of this disease, which is the ultimate goal of exercise medicine. Hope you've enjoyed this lesson and this module.